Good to see everybody tonight. So we are still in the book of First Chronicles, and we got into the first chapter last week. I don't know if you brought your handout from last week, but I did copy this this list of kings from the tribe of Judah. Something that we'll kind of go over tonight. So that's on the back page there. We'll get into that when we get into chapter 3. When we're looking at David's descendants. So, just looking at last week, so we started in chapter 1. First word in the book of First Chronicles is Adam. That genealogy takes us in chapter 1 from Adam all the way through the descendants of Isaac. His descendants meaning Jacob and Esau. And we talked a little bit about this genealogy. So, when you get through the first part, I guess, you know, the genealogy from Adam all the way through Noah, this is our family tree as well. We're related to them, a direct descendant of them. But once we get past Noah, then it divides into Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Abraham comes through the line of Shem. And these genealogies are extremely important to the Israelites, to the Jews, because it tracks the lineage all the way through Abraham. And we looked last week at the promise that God had made to Abraham, that in his seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, which was in Genesis chapter 12, thank you, and then also in Genesis chapter 2, repeated there. And then we got into chapter 2, the first verse in chapter 2, I think it's the first two verses, we go through and we see the descendants or the sons of Jacob or Israel. His name was changed to Israel. And so we see all of those, and let me see if I can find the slide that we're on. We looked at this one, so we talked about this. This is a nice family tree. This is where the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth settled. This map here, we looked at that. We looked at the age of each of these individuals and the age of the earth. We looked at Abraham's descendants, and that goes through the end of chapter 1. We also looked at the pilgrimages, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob traveled while they were in the land of Canaan. I don't know if there's a pointer in there, but we see from Ur up to Padan Aram and then down into the land of Canaan there. Each of those are in their different colors. We looked at a short outline of the book of Genesis. That way you can see the lineage, and it talks about, it traces, the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. This is the 12 patriarchs that we just talked about. And then this is a family tree. So you can see Abraham up on the top left. Okay, so you can see it pretty good up there, top left, and you can see how it goes through Jacob or Isaac, Abraham to Isaac, and then to Jacob. So you're starting at the left, and you're going straight across to the right toward the bottom. You can see all the descendants, all the sons there. And then this is a little bit better. It kind of shows in pink. It's very obvious there. This is the allotment. So in the book of Joshua, whenever the children of Israel come into the land of Canaan, this is the land that's being divided there. And then we got to, I think this is where we left off, right? There in chapter 2. So just fast forwarding a little bit. So in chapter 2 we have Judah, and then that goes all the way through chapter 4. So chapter 2 through chapter 4, it's talking about the descendants of Judah, which is the lineage or the line that Jesus will come through. Jacob, then Judah. And so there was a lot of information on those chapters. And then if you look at the other chapters all the way through chapter 9, which is where the genealogies go through, it's broken out in different sections by the children of Jacob. So we see Simeon, Reuben, Gad, Manasseh, Levi, and then going through you have Issachar, Benjamin, Naphtali, Manasseh again, Ephraim. We know Manasseh and Ephraim were the sons of Joseph, so you won't see Joseph's name listed here. It's his two sons there, Asher, Benjamin. And then in chapter 9, we're looking at some of the returnees from captivity that come back from Babylonian captivity into Jerusalem, and then also we have the family of Saul there towards the end. So that kind of gives like an overall going through. But going back here, I'd like to spend a little bit of time on there in this chapter. So we said last time that Jesus's genealogy, it goes through Abraham. There's a promise that God made to Abraham. In his seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. If you go to Galatians chapter 3, we can see where that seed is Jesus. I guess you could say we're inheriting that blessing because we're blessed through the sacrifice that Jesus made. We can be forgiven of sins. We can be children of God. So we're taking advantage, or we have that available to us. And then there's also another promise that God had made to someone, which is in this chapter. Does anybody want to take a guess as to who that is? Okay. To Joshua, okay. Any other guesses? If you look at Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, it's real significant. There's two promises. There's promises that God has made to two individuals that Jesus will eventually come through their lineage. One is Abraham, the other one is David. So I think it is in the book of 2 Samuel. If we go back and look at 2 Samuel, and it is, I believe, chapter 7. Okay. 2 Samuel chapter 7, starting in verse 12. It says, "When your days are fulfilled, and you rest with your father," speaking about David, "I will set up your seed after you, who will come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod." But that promise there, and then also it's mentioned it's in 1 Chronicles chapter 17 also, where David wants to build God the temple, the house, and God tells him that he can't do it, but he said that he will again establish his kingdom forever. So that promise is repeated there in 1 Chronicles chapter 17. So that promise that his seed would reign forever, he's talking about Jesus there. So when we're looking at these genealogies, it's really, really important to see that, what was prophesied or what God had promised in the Old Testament, he fulfilled in Jesus, and we see that in the New Testament. So Jesus was a descendant of Abraham and David. And if you look at Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, which we talked about just a second ago, it says, "The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham." Very first verse, right in the New Testament. Very significant. All right, so that fulfills prophecy. We see God's promises in that. And so, starting in verse 3, we're back in 2 Chronicles chapter 2. I hope we're not skipping around too much. But in 2 Chronicles chapter 2, if we go back there, we see the descendants of Judah. So if we follow that through, starting in verse 3, we see Judah, and then there are his descendants there, and it goes all the way down through. It's Judah, Perez, Hezron. Where does it pick up also there? But there in verse 9, Hezron, Ram, Amminadab, Nation, and it goes all the way through to David there in verse 15. So we see that direct line from Abraham through Judah all the way down through when David, the descendant there being David. And then also, okay. Yep. All right, so we see that genealogy going all the way through. So we see that going from Abraham to David. And then if we look at the rest of the chapter real quickly, we see the descendants of Hezron. So there are a couple of other children that Hezron has. There in verse 18, Caleb, and in verse 25, Jeremiel. I think I said that right. And then in verse 42, we see more of the descendants of Caleb there. I wasn't going to go into those in depth or in detail unless anybody has any questions or anything to point out. Any interesting things to point out there? Any familiar names? No? Let's see. I think there in verse 20. Verse 20, it's mentioned, it says, and her begot Uri, and Uri begot Bezalel. Do y'all remember Bezalel? Bezalel and his friend Aholiab from, looks like Exodus chapter 31, verses 1 through 11. So Bezalel is one of the individuals that built the Ark of the Covenant and the furniture, the things that went in the tabernacle. So you can read about that in Exodus chapter 31. Also back in verse 17, or verse 7, we see Achan there. That's all the way back. We see in verse 7 he's called Achar. It says the troubler of Israel who transgressed in the accursed thing. Have a note there. It says his name is also translated or used as Achan in other locations. So did we talk about that last time? I think Achan. So we have Achan, Bezalel, the ones that were familiar. And then we have chapter 3. So in chapter 3, we go through and we see the family of David again. So the first few verses there, all the way 1 through 9, we see. So when David was king, he reigned for 7.5 years in Hebron, and he had 6 children, I believe, while he was there, and those are listed in the first 3 verses. And then starting in verse 4 through verse 9, this is when he moved his to kingdom or his the capital city or to Jerusalem. So 7.5 years in Hebron, and then he reigned 30 years, I believe, or 33 years in Jerusalem, and there he had 4 and 9 children, so that's 13. Besides Tamar, and then also some of the other children that David had with some of the concubines. So you can see the family there. And then when we get into verse 10, we see the descendants of Solomon. So Solomon was David's son. And then this is where this comes in. So this sheet here. So I don't know if you can see that. I think we've got this up here on the screen. Okay. I tried to make it a little bit smaller, or a little bit larger here. So in Israel, we had a united kingdom. So under Saul. Saul was the first king in Israel, starting in, I think, 1 Samuel chapter 10, all the way through the end of the book of Samuel. And then in 2 Samuel, we see where David is appointed king. Again, 7.5 years in Hebron, and then another 33 years in Jerusalem. And so the kingdom, when David reigned, you can see that all the way through the book of 2 Samuel. And then also when we get into 1 Kings, we can see where the kingdom is transferred to Solomon. So Solomon, his son, takes over and starts reigning. If you look at the dates, I don't know if you can see those, but Saul reigned about 1050 through 1010 BC. David was about 1010 through 970 BC, and then Solomon reigned, I think it says 930 or 970 to 930, and then Rehoboam, his son, reigned from 930 to, was it 716? Okay. But whenever Rehoboam, his son, Solomon's son, well, let's just read these real quick and then we'll go back and talk to them. So 10 through 16. I'm familiar with these names. I don't want to read a lot of the others, but all right. So Solomon's son was Rehoboam. Abijah was his son. Asa was his son. Jehoshaphat his son. Joram. Then we have Ahaziah. We have Joash, Amaziah, Azariah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Ammon, and then Josiah. And then Josiah, the sons of Josiah. Josiah had, I think, 3 sons. They were Johanan, the firstborn, Jehoiakim, Zedekiah, and the 4th Shallum. And then the sons of Jehoiakim were Jeconiah, his son, and Zedekiah, his son. So this is I guess you could say, a lineage, keeping that genealogy alive, from David all the way through to the last king of Judah, which was Zedekiah. So when I divided this up, I think this is the kings of Judah here that we just talked about, and it shows the years in which they reigned and the Bible verses that you can go to look at those. And then you can also see the condition of each of those kings. So the ones that are listed in green are good kings. They were obedient to God's commands. And then the ones that are not in green kind of went the other direction. So you can see by comparison, are they mostly good or mostly bad? Yeah, mostly bad. And then also you can see these here. Even the last few kings, we have the last 2 good kings, Hezekiah and Josiah there, but we have some really, really bad ones there. So I told you I split this up a little bit. So I put this here on this one. If you have the handout from last week, I also had another, let's see. There we go. So I don't know. Okay. So that's from the sheet from last time. But if you look at the list on the left, so whenever Rehoboam was king, the kingdom Israel divided into 2 different kingdoms. So you had Judah, the southern kingdom, and then you had Israel, the northern kingdom. The ones on the left are the kings of Israel, the northern kingdom. How many do we have that are in green? So we don't have any good kings. I mean, just as soon as Jeroboam took over and started, this was during the reign of when Rehoboam first took over, but Jeroboam, as soon as he received the 10 tribes, he immediately started changing things, set up a golden calf at Dan and Bethel, and appointed priests as he chose instead of the Levites, to worship. And then everybody just followed suit. Also, I think there's about 5 to 7 different kingdoms, I guess you could say, or not kingdoms, but what is that? Sorry? Dynasties. Yeah, dynasties. That's good. That's a good word. All right, good. So there's several different dynasties through there. I think there's around 5 to 7 of them. But if you look at the descendants of Judah on the right and all of the different kings that we have, some are good, some are bad, but there's only just one dynasty, and they're direct descendants of David, all the way down through, it's got Zedekiah there. This was the last king of Judah. If you can see it, I don't know if you can, but there on the left, so the northern tribe of Israel, they were eventually taken away captive in 721 BC. So the Assyrians come in and they pretty much destroy them, take them away captive. There are some of the people that flee into the land of Judah prior to the Assyrians taking them, because we can see there's descendants of some of those tribes in the New Testament, such as Anna. She was a descendant of the tribe of, I believe it was Asher. That is in Luke chapter 2 or 3. I think it's in Luke chapter 2. Also Benjamin. Well, Benjamin, I guess that was one of the tribes that went to Judah. So it was Judah and Benjamin. So, but 721, Israel's destroyed by the Assyrians. I think Hosea was the last king there. And then on the right, you can see, and that's kind of date comparison, you can see how Judah continued to and remained, but they will eventually go away captive also in 586 BC. They'll go away captive into Babylon. If we zoom in on these a little bit. So, I guess reason for the captivity. So, if we go back and we look at the law, and we go back to the book of Deuteronomy, just kind of give you, and you probably already know this, but I just want to kind of go back and look at some verses. So, whenever God brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, He brought them to Mount Sinai, and He gave them a law. He brought the 10 Commandments down from Mount Sinai, and also there were many other commandments that they had in the law. And that is basically the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch there. And we know that when it was time for them to go into the Promised Land, into the land of Canaan, they sent in 12 spies. 10 of them brought back a bad report, and they wanted to overthrow Moses and go back to Egypt. And so God makes them wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And then the book of Deuteronomy, right as they come up to the land, the edge of the Jordan, I believe it's Gilgal. Is that on the east side? Anyway, before they go in, Moses repeats the law. And so Deuteronomy is basically a second law or repeating of the law. And so he goes back in, I think it's starting in chapters 27 all the way through verse 30. God wants Moses, or actually Joshua, when he comes into the land of Canaan, to speak the blessings and the cursings upon the people. Blessings if they are obedient to God, cursings if they are not obedient to God. That's in chapter 27, and that actually happens in Joshua chapter 8 whenever they come into the land. But there is a passage in Deuteronomy chapter 30 I'd like for us to read. Starts in verse 15. So this is kind of a summary of all those things. Okay, blessings if you're obedient, cursings if you're disobedient. And some of the cursings are like God will bring in enemies to destroy them. He will bring in enemies to, destroy them with the sword. They'll die of pestilence. They'll die of famine. All right. But in Deuteronomy chapter 30 and verse 15, it says, "See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil, in that I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in His ways, and to keep His commandments, His statutes, and His judgments, that you may live and multiply, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land with which you go to possess. But if your heart turns away so that you do not hear, and are drawn away and worship other gods, and serve them, I announce to you today that you shall surely perish. You shall not prolong your days in the land which you cross over the Jordan to go and possess. I call heaven and earth as witness today against you that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live, that you may love the Lord your God, that you may obey His voice, and that you may cling to Him, for He is your life and the length of your days, and that you may dwell in the land with which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give them." So, if they go into the land and they're obedient to God, then He will bless them, and they will continue to dwell in the land. But if they're disobedient, then God said that they will surely perish. So, this division and all of these is a direct result of disobedience to God. Do you remember, or does anybody remember why the kingdom of Israel actually separated? So we have a united Israel under Saul and David and Solomon. But then it divides. Yep. Okay.
In Israel, Jeroboam that split off from it. Jeroboam told the elders that they were going to, that he was going to make it much tougher on them, a lot more tougher than some
Right.
his father had.
Yep.
So, I forget Rehoboam split off with 10 tribes.
Yeah, Rehoboam continued to have Judah, the 2 tribes, and then Jeroboam had the 10 tribes. Yep, to the north.
Yeah.
I mean, Jeroboam, Rehoboam, they rhyme. They're pretty close. Yeah, but
Actually, I went to Israel a long time ago, and we actually were able to see the place where the altar was for the gold, one of the golden calves. The other
okay.
one was at Bethel.
Bethel, yeah, Dan and Bethel.
We were able to see that. That was a wonderful experience.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Okay, yeah, but you know that's the situation that caused the division. But even back before that, if we go back to the days of Solomon, what was it that Solomon did? Do you remember? Let's see, if we go to 1 Kings chapter 11, I believe.
He followed after his pagan wives. He built them temples and then worshiped.
Yep. Absolutely. If you look at 1 Kings chapter 11, starting in verse 1, it says, "But King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, the Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and the Hittites, from the nation of the Lord, whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after other gods." Solomon clung to these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, which is way too many. One's enough, right? Yep. And his wives turned away his heart, for it was so, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, so these are the foreign gods that were in the land, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not fully follow the Lord, as did his father David. And Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of the Jerusalem, and for Moloch, the abomination of the people of Ammon. I don't know much about the others, but I know a little bit about this Moloch. This worship of this god involved child sacrifice. So they were sacrificing their children. That's what I guess that worship was included. Starting there in verse 8, and he did likewise for all his foreign wives who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. Verse 9, we saw from Deuteronomy chapter 30, God keeps his promises. We know that he does. Verse 9, so the Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning this thing that he should not go after other gods. But he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this and have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days, for the sake of your father David, I will tear it out of the hand of your son, which is Rehoboam. And I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David, God remembering his promise to David, saying that he would establish his kingdom forever, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. So this is the reason for the split here. And then we can see that we'll have some good kings, we'll have some bad kings. The kingdom of Assyria, there are no good kings. They'll go away captive, just as God had promised. When they were disobedient, worshiped other gods, he would send them away into captivity or have other nations come in and drive them out. And so with the kingdom of Israel gone, we have this is Judah, so these are the kings of Judah, while the kingdom of Israel was still in existence, but then afterwards we see here. And we see the Babylonian captivity that'll happen after the reign of Zedekiah. So, it turns from, I guess you could say, bad to worse. And I like to say it's the straw that broke the camel's back, but there is one of these kings, Manasseh. I don't know if you remember much about Manasseh, but it does say that he was one of the worst kings. And if we look back in 1 Kings, I think it is chapter, is it 21? No, let's... Oh, 2 Kings, I'm sorry. Yeah, if we look in 2 Kings, okay, and it is, it's in chapter 21. So we look in 2 Kings chapter 21. So Hezekiah was a really good king. He was the one that, destroyed the high places, and he went through and he did this reform, or he may have, I don't know if he destroyed the high places. That may have been Josiah, but he went through and he did this reform, turned his heart to the Lord. But his son, Manasseh, was not so. And if we look in verse 10 of 2 Kings chapter 21, it says, "And the Lord spoke by his servants the prophets, saying, because Manasseh, king of Judah, has done these abominations, he has acted more wickedly than all the Ammonites or the Amorites who were before him, and has also made Judah sin with his idols. Therefore, thus says the Lord God of Israel, behold, I am bringing such calamity upon Jerusalem and Judah that whoever hears of it, both his ears will tingle. And I will stretch over Jerusalem the measuring line of Samaria." Samaria has already gone into captivity in 721. Manasseh here is reigning about 697, so this is a few years after that. So that measuring line meaning that they will go away captive as well. He said, "I will stretch over Jerusalem the measuring line of Samaria and the plummet of the house of Ahab." Also one of the probably the worst king in Israel, Ahab. And he said, "I will wipe Jerusalem as one wipes a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. So I will forsake the remnant of my inheritance and deliver them into the hand of their enemies, and they shall become victims of plunder to all their enemies, because they have done evil in my sight and have provoked me to anger since the day their fathers came out of Egypt, even to this day." So this is kind of I guess you could say, the turning point, because even after Manasseh, we have Josiah, a really good king that actually, did a lot of reform. And I think it was Josiah that destroyed the high places. And Josiah was also one of the kings that went back to Israel. Do you remember the prophet, the man of God, that went to prophesy against Jeroboam? And he stretched out his hand to point at the altar, or to point at the prophet. So the king there, Jeroboam, stretched out his hand to point at the prophet, and his hand withered.
That was at Bethel.
And he couldn't pull it back. Yeah, Bethel.
That was first, wasn't
Yeah, it's in 1 Kings. Yeah, soon after that, probably around 12, 13, somewhere in there. Yeah, but there were some other prophets that there was a prophecy made back then when Jeroboam was reigning that there would be someone to burn the priests of these the prophets of these false gods, that their bones would be burned on the altar. Well, it was Josiah that fulfilled that prophecy. And so he did a lot of good in Judah and also in Israel. But if you see his sons, Jehoahaz reigned for 3 months, and then he was taken away. He was taken into Egypt, and he remained there until he died. Jehoiakim, also a son of Josiah. Jehoiakim was a really bad king. He was the one in the book of Jeremiah where he kept cutting the words that Jeremiah had written and throwing them into the fire. He reigned for 11 years. Jehoiachin only reigned for about 3 months. He was taken away into Babylonian captivity, where he would spend, I think it's about 37 years in jail before he was finally released by evil Merodach, the successor to Nebuchadnezzar. And then we have Zedekiah. He reigned for 11 years also. This was the last king. And as God had promised, he will send them away into captivity. It was Babylonian captivity. So they will come in 3 waves. The first one in the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim, and then also at the end of his reign, Jehoiakim will be taken away captive. When Jehoiakim was taken away, this is when Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were taken away into captivity around 606 BC. And then Jehoiachin will be taken away around 598 BC, along with Ezekiel. And then Zedekiah will be taken away there at the end of his reign in 586. So he'll take them away into captivity, and they'll stay there for 70 years, as prophesied by, actually at the end of 2 Chronicles in chapter 36, it talks about that they'll stay in Babylonian captivity for 70 years, as prophesied by Jeremiah the prophet, which is also in chapters 25 and 29 in the book of Jeremiah.
It's kind of interesting. It's back up at the top that Asa, who was Solomon's son, Asa was kind of like, even though he was a good king, he was kind of like Solomon. I just took out an article on this. But then in his later days, like his 36th year of his 41-year rule, he hooked up with the king of Syria instead of trusting the Lord.
Yep.
In his last 3 or 4 years, actually, he did not follow the Lord.
Yep.
Which is kind of like what Solomon did at the end. He does great.
Yep.
He's older than his old age or when that would be. Which is kind of surprising that they would,
Turn in their yeah. Solomon was like that. I mean, he was very, very good all the way up until the end, and then his heart turned away also there. It's kind of interesting also, Manasseh was taken away captive for a few years while he was still king, and he returned, and he humbled his heart before God. So he turned there towards the end of his life. But the things that he had done, I mean, it was already too late. The things that him causing Israel to sin had already set in motion the things that would happen. And it's also interesting that of all of these kings, Manasseh was the one that reigned the longest. He reigned for 55 years, longer than any other king in Judah. All right, so we can kind of see what led up to these things. And then, of course, they'll spend 70 years in Babylonian captivity. Unlike Israel, Judah will return. So they'll return there toward the end of the book of 2 Chronicles, also in the book of Ezra. So they'll come back and they'll actually inherit the land. So let's see, let's go back here. So that's kind of a little bit about Solomon's descendants. And then, any questions about that? Okay. But the important thing is the genealogy. It goes from Abraham to David through his descendants, and we can see all the way up to the captivity where Zedekiah, David's descendant, is taken away into captivity. And also in chapter 3, let me turn back over here to First Chronicles. It'll list some of the descendants that will return from captivity. So even while their children of Israel or children of Judah is in captivity, God is still taking care of them and still keeping that line, that genealogy, that line alive, keeping his promise in blessing David to have a king that will sit on his throne forever. All right. Is that the second bell? All right, cool. I was hoping we'd finish up with the genealogies in December, but I think we don't have class next week. We don't have class the next 2 weeks. So we'll try to finish up next class period then. All right, thanks a lot.